Welcome to the Strictly Casual Podcast. We're a team of 3 friends, each with a passion for video games, movies, and most importantly, stories. We want to invite each other into the stories that influence the way we see ourselves and the world around us. Our goal is to build a community of enthusiasts, a community of people with their own stories and experiences to share, and we hope you join us for the ride.
If you've been with us for the past 6 years, you have probably listened to our gaming news show Checkpoint or our movie podcast Freeze Frame. If you've never seen Strictly Casual before, there has never been a better time to jump in. With this new podcast and fresh creative direction, we're excited for you to join us on this latest chapter.
So, why are we going in this direction? Well, we feel like this is something creative that we need. Let's come back. Let's start up a new podcast. Let's start up some more content, and let's just be creative together. Let's do this and have fun together as great friends that we know how to do. So, what can you expect from us? Our content across the board is basically going to be in-depth conversations for our podcast. We have a brand new podcast here, which is the feed that you're listening to. And we also have some content that we want to do on YouTube, kind of more scripted out, more highly produced. And you can check out the first one that's up, which is something that we're really proud of. It's James has been working on it for a long time. Vincent has been editing it, grinding away. And so definitely check that one out.
Now, Ryder, This is a question I've got for you, okay? And you, James. Why are we doing this? Like, we had these 2 podcasts. Checkpoint had 150 plus episodes. Freeze Frame had 100 plus episodes. And we were doing those every single week without fail for years, for a couple years, 3 years in some cases. Why did we cold turkey that? And why are we starting over? What is this?
Let me tell you, Vin. There's a little something called burnout. I think what just the direction that we had gone had run us into the ground. We were so caught up in just the grind of, okay, all we have to do is put out another episode. And we were making so much content, but we weren't doing it in a way that really creatively fulfilled us. It became more about the relevance and, okay, we have to report on this. And we came at it so much like a news podcast, when I think the thing that really drove us were these conversations when we got into the things that we actually were really passionate about. And it was those little moments like throughout it that kind of kept us going. But the more we tried to stretch ourselves along with it, I think we kind of burnt out on it. And so the reason why we're restarting, the reason why we're taking a new approach to the podcast is to sort of step away from all the hype of relevance and getting the video out quick after a movie's released, and so that it's still in the conversation, and really let these conversations and the podcast and otherwise be driven about what we care about.
Mm-hmm. And
I think
another thing too, then this is, I know we all agree, is that while we're doing these conversations, we also care about community, and we wanted to kind of have a conversation with everyone listening, everyone watching, all you guys at home. It's like, let's do this together, because we love connecting about art. We love talking about it with just us. And it was cool that when we were doing all this content, we had people commenting, we had people in our Discord. You guys were telling us what you liked, what you didn't like, what you were watching, what you were playing. And I think we missed that too, on how, especially during the COVID days when we were doing a lot of social media, the communities grow, and we're kind of missing that. Like, oh man, we missed that connectivity with other people to grow a fun community that we had. And like, that's really special,
Totally. I think you guys hit the nail on the head that this idea that we had to be the first ones to talk about something, and something had to come out immediately when something happened. This new podcast, which we're calling the Strictly Casual Podcast, first of all, it'll be video games and movies. So we're going to have each episode kind of titled a certain subject. So,
and maybe TV too.
Yeah, maybe TV too. I would say probably TV. I can already think of a couple TV shows that I'm excited to talk about. So each episode will be its own topic. It won't be like, oh, here's a little bit of movies, a little bit of video games in the same kind of conversation. It'll be like, hey, we all watched a movie and we all want to talk about it. So this is going to be title of movie, and then we're going to talk about that, or a video game, or a show. Now, also, in addition to all of this, I think part of the burnout was the schedule that we put ourselves on as well. So at first, I wouldn't expect this to be a, twice a week podcast or anything. I think we're going to start at the pace that we're comfortable with creatively, and kind of grow into that as we have a new system down and are excited about things. It'll be easier for us to produce more and more content. But part of the creative burnout for me, at least personally, was that schedule that we were on, and that we had to produce something that came out this week. And that also lowered the quality of our content as well. And I don't think I'm ready to do that with this. I would like each episode to be very proud of it. And so that's going to come with some research into these things. That's going to be some new ways to look. We want you guys to watch our podcast or listen to our podcast and get something new out of it, whether it's a new way to look at a movie or a video game, a new perspective on it that you've never seen before, or just finding new ways to appreciate art that you've seen or not appreciate it. You might totally disagree with us on what we're talking about. And I think that's the beauty of it. Those are the conversations I want to have. I don't just want to report news on games or report news on, movies.
Yeah. And with that, I think the way in which we approach making content wasn't doing what we wanted for us and for us as a brand and as a community. I don't think we were building the community that we necessarily wanted to. I think we are much more focused on the production content frequency. What we really want to do this time around is focus on what is the conversation to be had around art, around film, around games, and sort of do our best to include the community around us, you, the viewer, to ask questions and be in conversation with you all, because so much about when we came back and we said, hey, we want to do this again, is because we all wanted, and Ryder, you touched on this, of like, we want people to connect with, and that includes us, and it goes outside of us three, as we want to invite more people in this community, more conversation. And I don't think that was really being fulfilled. I think we got, comments and passerbys here and there, but we really want to reevaluate the way we approach conversations and be inviting and be really, instead of just like covering things, to make it about the conversation. I feel like that, that words come up again and again and again, but it is really just about the conversation. What do we think? And if we don't have a conversation around a topic, maybe that's not worth it to us to bring up, but and that a part of that is also like listening to the community, and saying like, maybe the community will ask us questions. Hey, what do you think about this? Like, do you have thoughts on this? And that's us being in touch with you guys and saying, okay, like, yeah, like the community really wants us to talk about this, but I'm not sure I have this, and being okay with saying, hey guys, we love you. We love, all of your feedback, and we love that you're passionate about this, but we actually aren't the people to talk about this subject, or this film, we just don't have that sort of platform to talk about it. Or maybe we do, and maybe we'll talk about it. And the key there is like, we have giving ourselves agency and freedom, and also the willingness to converse with each other and with the community in a mature way.
So here's a fun example that I have. Maybe this, can help clear the picture even more. So something I've been watching is Arcane. Of course, I've been bringing it up to these guys all the time, trying to get them to watch it. And if a lot of you, if you're watching it, definitely let me know, hop in the Discord that we'll have linked, and let's talk about it, because Arcane has been consuming my mind so much. And something that I've noticed is that when we watch something or play something that we connect to, it might feel like, oh, it's just me and this game, or me and this movie, or me and this show. But then you get to see the community on social media, or you go to a pop-up or Comic-Con or whatever you might do, and you realize, oh, there's a whole group surrounding this. You're not alone in your passion for something. I think that's what's cool, is that when you can do something like this, when you do social media, or you post a podcast or post something, you start finding out, oh, there's other people that love that just as much as I do, and I thought I was the only one that loved that on that level. So with something like Arcane, I'm very passionate about it. If these guys watch it, if they don't, maybe I make a video and put that out and have an in-depth conversation about it, because there's so many people I've seen, like therapists, breaking down the show and different reactions of the Arcane show. With like anything, there's so much to unpack. And so because I'm passionate about Arcane, you might see something pop up. That's my goal, at least. Hopefully put something out for Arcane, because I like diving in deeper to something that I like. And so you might see something with that.
I think you hit an interesting piece there, is that, there's so many examples that are, so broad that tons of people love. But the thing that I love about this new direction of the podcast is maybe the more niche topics that you think nobody else is thinking about, but then we can bring those up and talk about them, and other people will, maybe they are excited about it and they haven't shared that they're excited about that. But you nailed it in that it's a conversation about things that we love and the stories that we love, no matter how big, how small, how new, and how old. Like, it can be all of those things. There's no limit. It doesn't have to be a 2025 conversation. We could be talking about a movie from the 70s if it's still, earlier than that, if it's still really affecting us.
Yeah, sure. And I want to like go back to what you were saying, Ryder, is like a goal for us is like we, in talking about things that we are passionate about, we also want to give each other platforms to make content on the things we're passionate about. And sometimes that means that we are not directly in that podcast. We want to ask that question of like, hey, because before it was like, oh, we kind of want as many people on the podcast as possible, but we're going to approach this in a much more purposeful way of saying like, for example, Ryder, like you're really hyped up on Arcane. I didn't finish season 2. Vincent, you haven't finished season 1 or 2. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
But just say like, yes, Ryder, like make the Arcane thing, in hopes that like Ryder really puts his all and can put his heart into it. And maybe Ryder's like, oh, I want to like talk to Vincent about it because he hasn't seen it. I want to like, pitch it to him, and Vincent can like ask him questions about it. But also on the flip side, in terms of like what that does for you, the viewer, is that allows you to form unique relationships with each of us as podcast members, saying like, oh, I really like Vincent's content, or I really like Ryder's content. And that's okay because it's all us. It's all strictly casual. And that's just a part of us. And it gives you the chance to connect with us on a more personal level.
Yeah. I mean, even to go even further than that, like let's say we're using Arcane as an example quite a bit in this episode, but remember that you can bring that, like that, those pieces, those threads are within everything that we're trying to do, right?
Right.
Every type of content. We're just using that as an example. Like I would want somebody that's excited as a guest to hop on this podcast and talk about it too, and bring another, let's say, maybe 2 of us don't have as much experience on something, but we want to bring someone in that does have a lot of experience. We want to get people from a new point of view that are going to challenge us too, because this is not about, this is as much for a listener as it is for me. Like I enjoy these conversations. This is what I love about all interactive or cinematic art, is jumping in and talking about it with people. That's it. It's Strictly Casual is supposed to be a celebration of those things, and I feel like we lost that for a while. And this is the way that we're bringing it back to do it.
Yeah.
Now, do we want to talk about moving to like Letterboxd and kind of something like more of a specific point on how we rate films and how we get into that?
I think we could totally get into that. Vincent, you kind of showed hesitation, maybe?
No, this isn't a hesitation. This is just an interesting conversation that I felt like would be good to talk about in the first episode, is that we all view video games or movies differently in how we approach how good they are or bad they are. This show, the Strictly Casual podcast, the goal is not to rate things on like a scale, right?
Yeah.
But I think that when we all watch a movie or play a game, that number kind of comes up, whether we like it or not. That's just, it's something. We're not a review show. We're not a review show. That being said, we're all going to talk about things from our perspectives. And
I'm gonna say the example. We were talking about something the other day, and you were like, oh, that's like a 5 out of 5 movie, or it's a 3 out of 5 movie, but it's a 5 out of 5 for me. And I was like, what is that? What does that mean?
Companion.
Yeah, it was companion, right? You really enjoyed it, and you're like, oh, it's a perfect movie. I can't think of anything wrong with it. And so I was like, wait a second, like this is a very important part of who we are, and as you, the viewer, interacts with us, is understanding the lenses in which we view films and the way we rate films. And the goal, like for us as Strictly Casual, is like to have, in a more structural, tangible ways, like I think the plan is to have a Strictly Casual Letterboxd, and that'll be sort of linked to our individual Letterboxds, so you can see our own ratings and reviews, and that'll all be compiled into a really cool.
We got to get it done. This is a future
right,
endeavor.
This is a future thing, but just this is kind of like the idea. So maybe we should just kick it off. Like, Ryder, what is a 5 out of 5 movie? What is a 3 out of 5 movie? You were talking about companion. Maybe you could use that as an example.
For sure. So there's 2 ways that I rate films, and it's different every single time. But the ways I think about it is like the quality of the film, whether I think it's like the movie is good or not, and versus if I enjoyed it. Because like I'm sure everybody has this. Oh, the movie was horrible, but I enjoyed it at like a 10 out of 10 experience.
Totally,
so sometimes I put that both into my rating and I average that out. Sometimes I just put it, as a joke. With Letterboxd, you kind of, those who are on it know, you kind of joke around like, oh, 5 out of 5 for this film, when it's really like a 1 out of 5, like in general, well, art is subjective.
Sort of like quote unquote objectively.
Yeah, quote unquote. So like with Companion, watching that whole film, I was like, this is a perfect film in that everything that they did, because of the genre of the film, since it's a certain genre, you're like, oh, I hope they don't do this, or I hope they don't do that. I hope it ends this certain way. And it delivered on those beats for me. So I was like, okay, as for like how much I enjoyed it, it's perfect. It's like a perfect film. No complaints here. There's nothing wrong with it in my eyes. But like quality wise, maybe it's like, I don't know, like a certain 6 or a 7. Like the movie is nothing like Dune or like The Brutalist in the craft of the film. But that goes into my rating of like, let me average this out at like maybe an 8, So to get specific really shortly, it's like 10 is like a film that I will watch any second of any day. I can watch it beginning to end. So it's like, if a movie's amazing and I loved it, the highest I'll usually go up to is 9, because I'll never be like, oh, let me watch that movie again tomorrow. A 10 is like, I have to watch that movie again tomorrow, and I can watch it any day, beginning to end. I'll never be bored of any single scene. So 10 is a very high rating for me. But most of the times, most of the times I'm usually doing 6 or 7. If I had a good time and I enjoyed a film, it's a 6 or a 7. And that's on the 5-star rating, because they do half stars. So I put it like a 3 stars. But most of the time it's 6 or 7. And then if I'm having a really good time, it goes to 8. But I can that's pretty much it. So
I think what you're saying is you like to rate movies more on an emotional scale, more than like how critical scale.
Definitely. I'd say.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's totally valid and awesome. Let's keep on the movie train, and then we'll talk about how we rate and talk about games afterwards. But James, when you watch a movie, how are you rating it?
So I used to sort of straddle the line between kind of what Ryder was talking about, and you have an objective rating and emotional ratings, and I would review some films in an objective lens and some in an emotional lens. Like I could recognize like, oh, this is definitely a 5 out of 5 movie. I go back and forth also between using a 5-point scale and a 10-point scale. But I'm like, okay, like, yeah, this is a 5 out of 5, but I don't know if I enjoyed it that much, but I could recognize that it's really good. But what I think I'm moving to recently is going strictly emotional scale. And I think a good reason for that is that that review changes with each watch. And like I can revisit films and I can re-rate films differently based on where I'm at, because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine and she was like, you should really rewatch films. I'm not a huge film rewatcher, but they said revisit films because they hit you at differently in different points of your life. And I think to review a film in a quote unquote objective lens, I use quote unquote because I don't know if there is really an like you can kind of see craftsmanship in ways, but it's hard to really sort of have an objective lens because no one really has an objective lens. They have things they appreciate in films, whereas like I love cinematography. So for like, any Greg Fraser film, I'm going to bump that up maybe 2 whole points because I just really love cinematography, but some people don't value that as much. So I think I've moved purely to an emotional scale to reflect that sort of dependency on like the context, the whatever is going on in my life, the context. And like, for example, I have a Ikaru, Akira Kurosawa film, and that's a 3.5 because I just, for whatever reason, like didn't have a very good time with that movie, even though it's like a quote unquote objectively great movie. I just didn't, for whatever reason, resonate with it. And so that's kind of what I'm coming at it with. It just makes the most sense to me, but I'm curious, Vincent, where you're at, because you sound like you're somewhere in the middle. Yeah.
I think that most of the time, which I don't know if I'm proud of, I think of movie, like I'm obsessed with the craft of movie making. I love it. I people's different roles and their expertise and how they contribute to this like the thing that you sit down and watch the theater. There's so many people on it. I'm just, obsessed with all these different jobs. And so I think when I watch movies, unfortunately, I'm thinking about the non-emotional side sometimes. I'm thinking about the craftsmanship. I want to know about the writing. But that is emotional
for you.
It is emotional for me. It does.
So in a sense, that is not
That's true.
unemotional, right? Because that's what you
It's a
value.
balance. It's a balance.
Yeah.
I think when I talk about a rating for a movie, unfortunately, my head sometimes goes to, well, the writing for this character wasn't very strong, but then you think about the writing wasn't good, therefore I didn't have an emotional connection with the character. So maybe I am rating it more emotionally, but that is like the tightrope that I walk sometimes. And I tend to watch a movie and think about it, and sometimes emotion can take a backseat if a film is like operating on a level that I can't fathom. That is an emotional experience that I'm having. It's less
That
about
expertise takes you to that level.
yes.
You're
if
like, how did
somebody's
they shoot
flexing-
this? You're
Yeah.
thinking more of the behind the scenes versus. Okay, yeah.
I
Makes
love
sense.
I love that aspect of movies, and so if nothing wows me about that aspect of it as well, then I'm kind of stuck with it didn't really hit emotionally either, so that's probably a pretty low score.
And I think
But-
you need both, right?
I do think you need both.
You need a little bit, at least for like me. I think it's yes, there are sort of outlier films that maybe not have high qualities of production, but that sort of gets into sort of like nostalgia for me, right?
And I have
Where
plenty
you're-
of those examples.
right? Where you're like,
Yeah.
this is going to the 3-finger scale, like a bad good movie,
Sure.
or a good
Oh, yeah,
bad
good,
movie.
bad.
Sorry,
Bad,
good bad
good.
movie. So you're like, I recognize that this doesn't have a level of craftsmanship, but I just had a good time
100%.
for whatever reason, and that can dictate it. And so that's why, yeah.
But that's totally valid. I think that's
Absolutely.
that's a part of this too. Is like I want to talk about the craftsmanship of film and also the emotional value of
Yeah,
film and
yeah, yeah.
because
why is
they're
something
both
so
real, you
yeah.
need both.
Exactly. Why is something 50 years old still 60 years old still affecting me now? Well, probably because it's a bunch of experts in their jobs making this final product. And also it's telling a story that is just as relevant now that it was 50, 60 years ago. And those two things are why we're talking about them still. And
Right.
it is that mix of the emotional side and the more criticism piece. I don't know. I guess that's how I would put it.
Especially when you notice, like when you watch behind the scenes, like I've gotten into watching more, making of for film and animation, especially in
Yeah.
animation, just because, you're animating frame by frame, and you're drawing every little detail and you think, oh, maybe that thing in the top right corner doesn't matter. It's like, no, there was care. There was
It's
attention
purposeful.
to detail. It's purposeful. Yeah. And so when
Yeah.
you're watching a scene, I, of course, relating back to anything in animation, and you're like, oh, wow, this hits so hard is because they're talking about how do we deliver this scene, in animation specifically, not really for anything else. How do we deliver this scene? How are we drawing this? How are we writing this? How are we moving a body language? But I think behind the scenes, learning how they make something gives you more of an appreciation for the motion of that, because it's not just story, it's the craftsmanship of it, of like thinking of it separately,
Yeah.
which you have to have story, but you think of the cinematography and how you execute that. How you execute a story, you can give 5 directors, they'll all execute a script in completely different ways. And that's what's
Totally.
so fascinating.
I think this is special because I think the majority of people do strictly rate things on like an emotional scale. They don't think about the behind the scenes of the film
Yeah.
or the game.
I see a lot of
think-
10s, and I'm like, wow, this is cool.
and that's
like,
special. That, like,
yeah.
I'm not here to discount any of that.
no,
I'm
of
also
course not, yeah.
that is totally valid. Like if you love a film that's a 5 and I think it's a 2,
Yeah.
whatever, who
Totally.
cares? Who cares?
Who
That's
cares?
why these
Because
conversations
you enjoy
exist.
the movie.
Yeah. Now I want to jump into video games because we talked a lot about movies, but video games is an important piece of
Should
this
we
puzzle.
talk about what we value though? Like, what are the things? So, Vincent, you're like really big in behind the scenes. I want to know if, like, what is the thing? Like I said, I really love cinematography, and that's something that'll
sure,
really. But do you
it's
have
different
something
for each
that is
movie?
like, yeah,
It's
you're
different
right.
for each. I don't have.
Based on
It's
what
not
they
one
deliver,
thing that I
yeah.
look out.
Based on what they
If
do.
there's a standout, then I'm like wow, and then it's a standout. It's I'm not always looking for the same thing in every movie.
Ryder, same for you.
It's definitely slow motion. Just
You're
because.
hilarious.
No. I mean, like, no. If I could say anything, definitely score. It's the score.
Totally.
If it has to be the music, because like
But that
you
can be such a driver of emotion too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because like if you're delivering a scene and it looks gorgeous, I'm like, this looks gorgeous, but my emotional is only coming through music. I'm like, how are you crescendoing that orchestra? How are you writing that piece? That is what I'm
Or
like.
choosing not to.
Yeah, or choosing not to. That's what I'm listening to, and that's what I resonate most with. It's always hearing a score that, because you can see a movie that's like, oh, this is an okay kind of scene delivery, but you
Yeah.
add a score on it and it elevates it. I'm like,
And it
wow,
adds.
Yeah.
they didn't need to go this hard, but they did. And the music, I
Yeah.
think, is what really hammers that down.
Right.
Totally.
Okay.
Vincent,
I'm changing the tracks. We're going
Yeah.
games.
Okay.
go for it.
Ryder, you told me about movies. Now tell me about games. When you play a game, what are you looking at? What are you looking for?
For me, I think there are two things when it comes to like video game mechanics. Let's talk about that. I'm looking for response.
Or how do you rate them?
How I rate? Oh yeah, how do I rate them? Yeah, right. When I rate a video game, I always think about I connect to story-based games, single-player story-based games, and I look at is the story connecting to me. I always try and find a weird way to connect to it, even though it might be ridiculous and outlandish, like a fantasy game. I'm like, how am I connecting to that character? You know, and by the end of that story, does it land? You know, I think of The Last of Us, I think of God of War, of course, Uncharted. And while the stories I may not relate in any way, I think of them as like epic pieces, epic set pieces, and I'm like, this is a cool, this is like a film, really. And you know, games are blending that line, but it's always single player story based games are what I connect to, and then also there are a handful, very small handful of multiplayer games that I connect to and I rate higher than the quality of because of the connection I have with friends and because of
Yeah,
how
that's
long
big.
you invest. I mean,
Yeah.
people know you could spend years playing a video game and it could be an okay game, but because you're spending years laughing or crying or yelling with a friend and having or family, that game is special to you. So those are the two things that I would rate a game on.
I
Good
think-
story and memories.
To add to that a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
that is also what this podcast is kind of trying to talk about is the story's not just the story of the art piece, whether a video game or movie.
The
It
presented
also-
story.
yeah. It's also your experience with it. And I think
Your story, like
Yeah.
the story on the other
Yes.
side.
right, the video games, I think that's easier to think about when you talk about video games because you're interacting with it physically, you're doing the
Directly.
actions.
Yeah.
But I do feel like with film, there's a lot of that too. Quite a bit of that. How you're experiencing it goes into how you feel about it and what you
Yeah,
think.
theater experiences.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. And
Okay,
I
James.
even want to, well, sorry, if you don't mind us
Copy.
touching on that a little more, is like, I think there's such an interesting thing going on here where we talk about interactions with film and film being like, okay, like it depends on the film and how I relate to that and the way I view it. Whereas like, Ryder, what kind of games do you like? He's right off the bat, he's like, I like single player story focused games and I like multiplayer focus. And I think that's so interesting that because player agency is such a big part of it, it changes the way in which we have like expectations out of games. Like I have a friend who's like, I love games that feel good. Like, so he loves a lot of platformers because he loves movement and, you know, the actions of the way you traverse a world. Whereas like me, I think things that I really love in games is a really cool art style. And I love a really interesting world with things to discover and uncover. I like story. I think it's hard for me not to like story-based games. If there are interesting characters, that does so much for me to pull me in, but I almost don't think I think that's not primary for me. I think of a game like any Souls game, any Elden Ring game, like I really don't care about the characters themselves. I care about like the worlds and I care about how it feels to play the moment to moment combat. I want to like the gameplay loop going through each section, level, eliminating enemies, doing the upgrade thing, building my character. That's what's really fun to me. And I think I echo a lot of what Ryder's sentiment is too, of like, what's the friend experience? What is there a social experience around it? Like for that was Lethal Company for me, with like a bunch of my friends. It was the only game we would all play together, and so we'd always go in and play Lethal Company, and just had such a fun time, screaming, being scared, laughing together.
Totally.
Yeah, Vincent.
I mean, I would agree with both of you. I don't have too much to add on those things. I think what I said earlier about the story being not just the story that's written in a game, but also the stories around a game, because I have so many good memories playing different games that maybe have a weak story, but they're important to me because A, B, C. Why not? But if we're talking about games we kind of gravitate towards that I'm that I think highly of. I do think of a lot of single player story based games, and that kind of tends to it gravitates me because I like stories, and that's important to me. But I like the stories of playing something that's more mechanics based, something that I'm having fun with. Why is that a good story? Because maybe it's the friends that I'm surrounded with, or the world itself is telling a story. Or there's so many different ways in games that it's not just writing.
Yeah.
It's they're very different. Video games and movies are very, very different, and also have so much in common. And I think that excites me about every time I jump into a game. What's going to surprise me is it might not be a great dialogue moment or an awesome boss fight. It might be. We just talked about this. You can get a sneak peek over in James's new video that he just put out. But simply like walking around a populated town in a video game can have so much story in and of itself, and that's such a moment that I wouldn't expect. You can walk into a bar in Red Dead and things are happening, things are going on. I want to see. I want to be a fly on the wall in this world. That kind of stuff excites me in a video game.
I'll give two quick. Oh yeah, you can go. I was just going to give two quick examples after.
Yeah. We'll get to that. I just want to like mention the conversation piece around a game, and I think that is such a big part too for both film and games. Of like, if there is a community-based conversation around it, people sharing opinions, they're like on Twitter, they're retweeting it, they're saying, hey, like this is such a big thing here, or oh, did you guys experience this? Like when Breath of the Wild came out, people are like exploring this world and they're figuring out these mechanics and the way things work, and I really latch onto that piece too, and that can really elevate my rating for a game, just being on that initial conversation when a game first comes out. It's really fun.
Totally.
Yeah, the examples that like a game that really like surprised me was Astrobot. I mean, it's just kind of the mechanics. I mean, I know it won Game of the Year, so it's no surprise, but that's one of those games where it's like something different, something new, gives you a new experience, and that's all that I was going to say right there.
Totally.
It's so good. It's so good. Is there any other things that you guys want to talk about this podcast direction? Obviously, if you're joining us for the first time, we are kind of relaunching our YouTube as well, and James has written an incredible video essay that we edited and presented, and that's up on YouTube. You can check that out. But as far as the Strictly Casual podcast, is there anything else you want people to know going into what our next episode will be? A regular type of content, not this intro type of deal.
The only thing for me is jump in. Like, I just want to invite you, the viewer, to be a part of the community and just kind of interact with us. You know, We're not, as much as we are three people behind a screen, we're also really eager to interact and to have conversations with everyone. I know we kind of like beat that dead horse a little bit, but
I don't know. I mean, that's a core pillar. We could beat that. Who cares? Yeah. It's important.
Awesome.
I would say just to like, if take it as an example, don't be afraid to kind of talk to your friends about what you love. Cause I think there's been so much time of not really doing this with these two guys that I'm like, you start to miss it because you don't realize how healthy it is and how much mental health, how much mentally it helps you to talk about what you love and to talk about what's going on in your brain and to just, share a conversation with a buddy. Like it really matters a lot. So doing this, I'm really excited to do this and to go in deep with some conversations and learn and share some experiences and just share with you guys and get more into it and come back and doing this more. Have it.
I love it. And on that note, hop in the Discord because we want to talk to you. What are you watching? What are you playing? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? That's like what this is all about. Our podcast link is in the description below, so you can check that out. Jump in. All of our socials should be linked as well. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, all the places that you can imagine. TikTok for sure. And then we'll be here doing it. You'll find a new episode. We'll let you know when there's a new episode. If you're in the Discord, you'll be the first to know what we're doing for the next episode, and that's also pretty important to us too. And we're so glad to be back. It was a long time that we stopped doing this. Too long. All right, guys, thank you so much. Thanks for talking. I can't wait to see you in the first episode. That's about. You'll have to join the Discord to find out because we'll see. I don't know, something like that. Awesome. All right. Peace out, everybody.
Bye.
Peace out, everyone.